Yo, all I'm saying is we should talk about this. This guy's like big time, like Marvel Kingpin level.
Listen, you know the media, and I know the theology. In order to move our product, we need a distributor. Jamco may be unconventional, but he's got the skills and network to move our biblical worldview material on a wider level.
Yeah, but this guy is like the king of mindless consumption. He's not going to be interested in our product, or if he is, he may not need to keep us around once he's seen it. I'm just saying we need to be careful. That's all. You gotta be careful.
Shh. Here he comes.
Mr. Clean and his boy. Yo, so what do I call you anyways?
The cinema guy.
Don't tell me this Professor X looking guy is the fabled cinema guy. Well, come on. Show me what you got.
All right. Here's a sample. We think you're gonna dig it.
In a world where entertainment is viewed as mindless diversion, only good for momentary distraction, one podcast has taken a stand, thoughtfully engaging the art of our day, dissecting the narrative, and pointing the people back to the greatest storyteller of all. You are about to enter a new world, and you will never view entertainment in the same way again. This is Popcorn Theology.
Yo, welcome movie lovers and theology nerds to episode 327 of Popcorn Theology, where we examine films for where they align with our greatest story and our greatest storyteller, discussing what to receive, reject, and redeem for common ground, fruitful conversation, and mindful movie consumption. I'm Captain Cook. David.
Sorry, I couldn't. It was the mask. You couldn't hear me through it.
You're good, man.
I've been cooking, sorry.
And I'm Jam.
Oh, man.
You didn't think I was going to wear my good clothes for this podcast, did you?
I'm really glad that this is just a chest up kind of recording session here. For those not watching the video, you're missing out. I'm just going to say.
If I could stand up, we're going to see the tidy whitey.
No, I'm
okay.
good.
All right.
I'm good. With a pistol tucked in the back. Oh, fantastic. So, Jamco, what'd you think of that sample?
Tight!
Oh, fantastic. Welcome, everyone. We are going to be reviewing season 1 of Breaking Bad, created by Vince Gilligan, starring Bryan Cranston, Aaron Paul, Anna Gunn, and a whole bunch of other people that, and even more throughout subsequent seasons.
That's right. A chemistry teacher diagnosed with inoperable lung cancer turns to manufacturing and selling methamphetamine with a former student of his to secure his family's future. At least that's how the show begins.
Right.
So here's our plan. We are planning to cover all 5 seasons of Breaking Bad throughout 2024. And so this is episode 1 for season 1, and the others are tentatively scheduled to drop on the following dates. Season 2, we're looking at April 2nd. Season 3, July 30th. Season 4, we're looking at October 22nd. And season 5, December 31st.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, man. It's going to be good. It's going to be a good year. I'm almost bummed that we're going to be waiting so long to get to each one of these. But that's self-control. So
it's also important for me since this is the first time that I am ever watching through this series. So we will keep each episode focused on the themes from that one season, at least as best as we can. I know I will, because I have no reference for what comes next. So hopefully you guys won't get ahead and spoil any future seasons for me or the listeners. So this is the perfect opportunity to watch the show with us, at least with me for the first time, although these guys are watching it again. And fortunately, first season was a shorter season due to the writer's strike. So if you haven't watched it and you're like, well, maybe I'll just listen to what they have to say. It's only 7 episodes. So you don't have much to catch up on before joining us. So stop before we hit the break and get into spoiler territory, go watch the show, and then come back and see what we thought.
Yeah, absolutely. It's kind of funny, history repeating itself, that the last time there was a major writer's strike was when this first season was being produced and released. And so then, as of the last 6 months to a year, there was another writers and actors strike. And so, that's kind of the timing. It actually works out in a way pretty well, because that's one reason that we're covering some older stuff, because that's going to delay a lot of the new releases in 2024. And also, I've just been really itching to cover this show for a long time. Richard knows I've been bugging him about it since just about day one. We did an episode on one of the seasons of Better Call Saul at one point, which we never really came back to. We just did, I think, season 1, which was also a very good show. But anyway, this one warranted a bit of a deep dive. So,
well, you've also been bugging me to watch this for years, and
you made the mistake of telling me you hadn't seen it. So
kind of like I told like I told Richard, I hadn't watched all of The Office. And I hadn't seen The Shawshank Redemption. This 2024 is my apology tour for everything, apparently. So
good stuff. Well, I want to know what you think for sure. So before we get to spoilers, we're going to give it some popcorn theology ratings. So we got from a popcorn perspective, what did you think of this show? And in particular, this season? Because I know for at least me and Jam and a lot of our listeners, we're thinking of the whole show in totality. And that's really hard not to do when you know where it's going. But I've been trying really hard to just focus on these 7 episodes. So yeah, basically how do we rank it? Was it stale, fresh, or buttered and salted? So basically, was it bad, good, or great? It's buttered and salted with a little chili powder, if you will. So, shall we have James kick us off?
Sure. I mean, I could try to pretend to mess with you. Like, I just messing with you, man, and try to say it was stale, or even say that it was just, I guess it was fresh. But honestly, of course, I thought it was buttered and salted. And I knew that kind of going in. I don't know if you guys know, I'm sure you guys have heard this story, but Sir Anthony Hopkins sent a note to Bryan Cranston. There's actually, you can find the email, you guys can look it up, or maybe we'll link to it in the show notes, but there's several places where you can find it. But Anthony Hopkins wrote him this long email basically saying it was the best his acting was the best acting he'd ever seen in his entire career. And that the whole production had a kind of artistry that is rare. I mean, you have Sir Anthony Hopkins saying this is about the top of all acting and production and artistry that he's seen in his illustrious career as a thespian on stage and in movies. That's kind of crazy. And
was he clarifying just in film? Or just in television? Or
it feels very general when I read it. It's like, this is about the best I've ever seen in my life and career. I was just like, wow. So it's like, all right, I know this isn't going to suck. Yeah. There's just no way.
Yeah.
And so far I would agree. It's top notch. It is top of the genre, top of television, and top in a lot of ways. I mean, it's getting kind of giving me vibes of another show that I really loved. I don't know if you guys have seen The Shield. But
Agents of? No, I'm just kidding.
No, thanks.
I've seen that.
No, The Shield was a quote unquote cop show, but it sort of broke all the usual rules of TV and kind of the genre in a pretty radical way, because you basically had this your protagonist was a horribly corrupt cop, and his squad and all of some of the themes of just depravity that this show seems to be delving into from just another angle. So if you liked, I would say if you enjoy Breaking Bad and you're looking for something similar, I'd say that's something a little bit earlier. I was thinking about maybe 6 to 10 years earlier before Breaking Bad, but it's probably worth checking out if you're a Breaking Bad fan. And also, I feel like I'm watching it at the perfect time, because I didn't realize the first episode, it was like he's turning 50, which I just turned 50. So I feel like this is the perfect year for me to experience this show. And hopefully not go off the deep end.
I was going to say, maybe it's the awful time for you to experience
Walter White. Maybe it's the wrong time.
Yeah, I don't know.
I guess we'll see. That's where I'm at.
I was going to say, and I just to commemorate your birthday, James, I made you this plate of scrambled eggs with bacon. No, I'm just kidding.
Veggie bacon?
It's veggie
bacon.
Not real
That's
bacon.
right.
You don't get real bacon, even though it's your birthday. Good stuff. Yeah, no, I agree. It was definitely, well, I got to be honest. This is the kind of show that is very easy to oversell to people, right? Like when you say it's, I've often said this is the best show ever made, the best dramatic TV show ever made. And there's some people, and I'm kind of one of these people, where when you hear that, you're like, probably not. Is it really that good? I definitely have that kind of vein, if you will, in terms of my taste. And so I always tell people it's amazing. It's really good. You got to watch it. But it is also, I know there are people that are not going to hear that as, as for what it is, or it's just going to be pure opinion. But I think that, if you can call a show objectively great, this one is objectively great. But also, in my opinion, it's amazing. Buttered, salted, chili powder, all of that. My history with the show is this is easily the last show that I watched live. I don't think I caught every single episode live, just because I was in college during the time. You miss stuff. But I caught certainly all of seasons 3 through 5, every episode as they came out. And 1 and 2, I caught most of those. So I missed a few, and I caught up on some. But watching them as they came out, this was the way TV was meant to be engaged with. This is before, it was certainly in the era of cable TV. So it's not like there were 4 channels. People weren't all watching the same thing. But once the show took off, everybody was watching it and everybody was talking about it. And that, to me, is so much better than what we have a lot of today, which is, I've chosen, these are the shows that I'm going to watch more or less on my own. There's the social aspect of it that's taken out. I think Breaking Bad was in that and kind of ushered in that golden age of television in a way that brought people together to discuss film and TV. And in a lot of ways, I don't know if I would have been as keen on the idea of being part of something like Popcorn Theology without, this type of engagement. And the weekly component, the cultural touch points, performances, writing, the music, cinematography, all the foreshadowing. There's just layers upon layers of this show to get into. So that's my semi-short version of my...
So David, you're saying it's stale then, right? That's the vibe I'm picking up.
Yeah.
That's what I heard.
What do you think, Jam?
No, it's buttered and salted for me as well. I did not catch it while the first season was running. I just looked it up. It was 2008 when the first season came out. But whenever I did start watching it, it was already on DVD or Blu-ray or whichever one it was at the point. And it was actually the reason, because AMC put this out, it was the reason I started watching Hell on Wheels, which was another AMC show about cowboys and the railroad. And it was also the reason I started watching The Walking Dead, because I liked how they put together this show so much. And so it was kind of like, I usually did not watch television shows and keep up with the episodes and all that kind of stuff. But when I watched this, I think I got the DVD or the Blu-ray, whichever, and it was my brother Josh. He was the one selling it to me. Like, you got to watch this show. And I put it off for the longest time. I thought it was going to be dumb and I wouldn't like it. But then, man, like, I watched it in a weekend. Like, we got it Friday, we started it, and I was done with it. And I remember actually a couple years ago trying to convince my wife to watch it. She's really into crime shows. And I was like, you're really going to like this. Like, I usually don't like watching the crime show documentary stuff that she watches, but I was like, this is right up both of our alleys. You should watch it. And so that was my second watch through, and it was equally as good. And now I'm starting my third one with you guys, and it is as enjoyable. My wife actually is doing her second one with me. And so while we were watching it, I was surprised how short this season was. And I didn't realize there were the writer strikes. But when we finished the season, I was like, wait a second, that's it? And I was curious, James, since this is your first watch through, are you itching to watch season 2? Like, did you finish season 1 and you're like, oh, I need more?
You must have started season 2, right?
Well, yes. I haven't started season 2 yet. No.
What?
No, we're actually we're going on a trip to Orlando. I didn't want to start it and then have to leave it. So there's sort of, I've also learned to pace myself. I'm kind of anti-binging now.
Wow.
To a degree, just because I I like the delayed gratification aspect of old school TV, kind of like you were talking about, David. It's like the must watch, but sort of I try to not maybe 2 episodes at a time, but not let things go too far. And so now I wanted to break and do this episode, and I think I'll try to do that probably every time is stop after each season and do the episodes so that I don't have that extra stuff going into the next one. And just to keep it fresh in that way. So I think that's what I'll do. But no, I definitely want to. Like that's it. I definitely want to watch it. In fact, I just looked it up. It's kind of interesting. I think maybe one of the reasons I didn't dive into it was because The Shield actually ran from 2002 to 2008, 6 seasons, and it was a similar descent. In fact, even the idea, like Bryan Cranston and the actor in The Shield, Michael Chiklis, were both kind of considered more cute, fun, nice kind of actors. And so that there's almost a symmetry there to where it's like, oh, that's it. Oh, this is like a nice guy. He was in some series called The Commish where he was like a town commissioner, and he was all. It's like he's going to be a kind of a real badass kind of guy. It's like no way. And then you watch it, you're like, oh my gosh, how is this guy transformed like this? And so I think I'd gotten through that, and Breaking Bad almost looked a little bit like, oh, this is a more of the same.
Yeah.
And I think I was so emotionally exhausted from The Shield that I was just like, I'm going to pass. And I feel like this show too, by the time you get to the end of it, I think Sons of Anarchy may be similar, some others as well. But like by the time I get to the end of this, I feel like I'm going to have thoroughly enjoyed it, but probably be emotionally destroyed. So
you are very right.
Absolutely.
That's a good way to describe it. And that's definitely a concern. And that was one wild thing about watching it. And I'll mention this again later, but the weekly element of it, that, the way that I think James, you've even talked about, the way that it was for people watching the original Star Wars movies in theaters and having to wait for so long without the knowledge of what was going to happen. Like, I can't fathom that because, time frame, but I do know the weekly element, or in this case, this is actually a pretty interesting element here. No pun intended with the word element, but because of the writer's strike and all of the delays, between the end of season 1 and the beginning of season 2 was almost a full year. Breaking Bad took ages to come out, and it was painstakingly slow for those of us waiting for each season to drop. It wasn't on a regular schedule. AMC gave them a ton of license to release however much, whenever they wanted. Each season has a different number of episodes, and it ended right when it needed to, in the perfect way in a lot of ways. But like, it's just not, it didn't feel forced. It didn't feel like there were extra episodes. They pushed it too far. But that weekly component of having to wait a week to see what was going to happen next, or a year in some cases, was definitely tough. And so for a show like this, I mean, like I said, it's easy to overhype or for some people to hear it as overhyping, but I think it's worth kind of just pointing to a few stats. The show won 16 primetime Emmys. I don't know if that's a record. That's got to be a record. That's crazy high. Cranston was nominated for Best Lead Actor for all 5 seasons, and he won for seasons 1, 2, and 5. He won 3 of the 5 seasons, Best Lead Actor. Wow. Aaron Paul was nominated for 3 seasons and won 2 of them for Best Supporting Actor. And it was nominated for Best Drama Series, all 5 seasons, and won 2 of those. Wow. And there were a bunch of other ones, directing, writing, music. Tons of other elements of the show were nominated for Emmys, Golden Globes, tons of other stuff. In all, it had 157 wins of awards, 247 nominations. On Rotten Tomatoes, the critics score is 96%. The audience score is 97%. Like,
when they're only a point or two apart, that's right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, right. Exactly. And another crazy thing, and for those who are just listening, or for that matter, even if you're watching, I don't have a screen share on. There's this show or this website called ratinggraph.com, where they take IMDb. You can look up any TV show on there, and they will take the IMDb ratings for each episode and each season, and they will trend them. They'll make a trend line and plot them. And they did it, and you can watch most shows, like Lost is a good example. Season 1, season 2, season 3, season 4, season 5, a lot of shows take a dive. This show, according to the ratings, has a perfect trajectory. Each season has an uptick in terms of the, not to be the nerd here, the data guy, but each season has an uptick in terms of it ended better than it started. and each season has a higher rating than the season before it. Like, that's unheard of. I've never seen another show that was able to pull something like that off. Anywho, just throwing that out there. I think that it's easy to let it fall just into the realm of opinion, but with enough opinions, maybe we can kind of convince anyone else who's gotten this far but hasn't actually watched the show yet. So
Yeah.
check it out. But of course, we all know that a film or show's quality doesn't always reflect the depths of its theological talking points. Sometimes excellent shows are maybe a little dry in terms of things to discuss. So what we're going to do, we're going to drink from the depths and the deep themes of the show. What's in the cup, right? That's the question. Is it diluted, or the beaker, if you will? Is it diluted, mostly fluff with an idea or two, carbonated with an average range of ideas, or is it my cup runneth over in that it's tight, tight, tight? So I'm curious what you guys think in terms of things to discuss. James?
Oh, well, I'm going to be conservative because I haven't seen the entire series yet, right? So I've only seen 7 episodes. So I'm just going to say carbonated so far. I'm not going to give it the cup runneth over yet. I'm guessing, based on everything I've heard, that the cup is going to run over as the show progresses. But there's definitely several good themes to discuss here as we get into season 1.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm going to have to agree there. I would say carbonated, again, just to try and give myself a ceiling to get to later. Because I know eventually that 5,000 milliliter round bottom boiling flask is going to boil over. And so there's that. But I will say that even in just the writing, even if the discussion themes aren't all super deep, there is so much care that's taken in the writing of this show that whenever they do get into a theme, and maybe James or anyone who's just watched season 1 can appreciate this, the care that they take means that once they do bring a theme into it and start playing with it, it's going to be done thoughtfully and carefully. Maybe not always the most intentionally, as we see with films, but it's going to be done well. And so you have that to look forward to. It's mapped out, it's carefully planned, but they still had updates that were made in light of things like casting availability and changes, and who they wanted to save that was not going to live initially, things like that. Anyway, Jam, what do you think?
Well, I'm a little different. My cup runneth over. I think the way that they tell the story is extremely compelling. And from a character standpoint, I love that you have a strong desire to root for Walt throughout the series. But specifically when you're watching season 1, they're setting up the character of Walt, and with how they set up the character, some of the choices he's making, you're rooting for him the entirety of the time. And as a viewer, I'm questioning my own morality as I'm watching Walt and thinking, oh man, I want him to do that, or I want him to succeed. I don't want him to get right. So I think that's part of it for me is they tell the story in such a compelling way, and the way they write their characters is compelling to the point of a lot of times we watch films or we read books and we put ourselves in the position of the character. And even just on my third watch through with my wife, like we had conversations of, is that something you think you would ever do? Or my wife's telling me like, don't you ever do something like that? Or, even his decisions to hide certain things from his loved ones. And so, I mean, it opens a whole can of worms, and I love the series. And for me, I think Breaking Bad is right up there next to the Netflix Daredevil with one of my favorite TV series. And so, there's a lot of themes there, and the way they put everything together is really well done.
Mm. Yep. That's a worthy 1 and 2 right there. I will say, even if this is second to that's fine. That adds out. That I'll allow it. And if anyone's interested, we did record. I believe we did 1 episode on each season, right? Of Daredevil. Yeah. We did season 3, right? Perfect. Yep. I'm sure we did. So we got 1 per season of Daredevil, and then I don't know if we did Punisher or not, but if not, we should go back and do Punisher.
Absolutely.
Excellent. Well, it seems like while there's certainly some differences, we're mostly on the same page with the quality and what you've got to look forward to in the next bit of this episode. So we're going to dig deeper after the ads. But first, before we drop the spoiler warning and peel back the layers, we do want to encourage you guys. We've got a couple of things that we want you guys to do for us. Perfectly legal, we promise. Nothing morally questionable there.
Sure. Get out there and work all of your contacts and network and encourage you to not to buy meth, but to like and share this episode with your friends. And if you like what you hear, let's broaden that conversation.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and if you want to hear more, you can make sure to subscribe to the podcast. You can follow us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Discord, and even on YouTube.
That's right. Yes. And one quick way that you can help support the podcast, quick and free, is just to give us a quick rating and review on iTunes or wherever it is that you listen. That is incredibly helpful. You can help support us financially through Patreon if you want to kind of put your money where your mouth is a little bit. So that's another option.
You donate at least $1 per month, and we'll make you what we consider a patron saint. And so this will give you special access to exclusive Facebook group, a channel on the public Discord server, and it also allows you to vote on future episodes of the podcast.
And of course, we are past the Christmas season into a new year, but since you may have got some money from grandma or some other things to spend, perhaps you want to go over to our merch store and buy some shirts, buy some stickers, buy some stuff that'll also just create the conversation. Hey, what's that? What's Popcorn Theology? So wear it, share it, and find ways to use it. And of course, also, it is the time of year where I just recently released a new edition of my book, Cinemagogue, which is kind of all about the foundation and basics of talking about film and faith and things like popcorn theology. But I will let us run the ads because I think Miss Minutes from Loki is going to explain that a little bit more for us. So let's jump to that instead.
Hey, y'all. Did you know that a long time ago, before Popcorn Theology, our co-host James literally wrote the handbook on movies and mindful consumption? And now we're happy to announce an all-new updated edition for 2023. It's called Cinemagogue, and this director's cut edition features 40 additional pages of content about your favorite films and the biblical basics on how and why storytelling aligns with Scripture. This variant of the first book has new reviews, illustrations, movie recommendations, and even discussion questions. It's the perfect addition for your must-read list or a great Christmas gift for your cinephile friends. Cinemagogue, the Director's Cut by James Harleman is available November 23rd in paperback and hardcover, as well as on Kindle. Get your copy on Amazon or at cinemagogue.com. And remember, watch mindfully for all time, always.
It is such a good night to kiss. It is such a good night to dance. It is such a good night to Scooby-Doo-Doo-Doo, 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 love.
And we are back, dropping the spoiler warnings as we dig deeper into Breaking Bad Season 1 and start to discuss our popcorn thoughts on this. All right, so let's go, popcorn theologians. Jam, you thought that this was buttered and salted. So why is that? What are some things you liked, didn't like, standout moments, maybe standout episodes, things that stood out to you?
I love the way they tell the story. And so you're in the perspective of Walt for most of the series. And every little detail within it matters. And that even extends to then the sequel series, Better Call Saul. Like every little detail matters. And I really enjoyed that because it makes you as a watcher really want to pay attention, especially when something you didn't think was that big of a deal comes up. And it's like, oh, that was actually a big deal. Like, for example, like when you're first introduced to Jesse, for example, Walt is on that ride with Hank, right? And he's sitting in the car. He's waiting on Hank. Hank is busting the guys for drugs. And you see Jesse climbing out the window, and then he falls off of the roof. And it's easy to watch that and not think that's that big of a deal. It's like a humorous moment at that point. But that one moment matters for the rest of the series and specifically for the rest of the season. And so even little things like that, they're very intentional about that. Or like one thing I thought about was Walt cutting off the crust from Crazy 8 sandwiches and the significance of that, then seeing Walt's humanity in that moment. And that just comes from a like side conversation that they have where Walt notices Crazy 8 ate around the crust. And so even little things like that, little details like that are woven throughout the entirety of the series. Walt cooking in his underwear is like the most iconic thing ever. One of the reasons I think I didn't watch Breaking Bad when it first was coming out, and why I was hesitant when my brother was kind of encouraging me to watch it, was because I only knew Bryan Cranston from Malcolm in the Middle. And kind of like what you were talking about, James, with like the quirky, lovable kind of character that actor played. I just could not see him Breaking Bad playing the character he was going to play. And then just like everything surrounding the show is part of the reason I had the ratings too, because like, if I'm not mistaken, there were tons of controversies over the series. People were afraid it would glorify cooking if they came out with the show. Like there were boycotts at Toys R Us, for example, because they were selling Breaking Bad action figures. Like there was so much hype around this series. And even in negative ways, like, well, we don't want to put this series out, or like, you can't have those toys at Toys R Us. So there's so much that went into it, which is why I rated it that, because there's just so many facets to the show.
Man.
Yeah. Not two-dimensional at all.
Yes.
No.
Yeah.
That's something I try to really stress. I think Christians have missed that mark a lot in trying to understand and deal with entertainment and media. And that's one of the things I try to discuss in the back half of my book, is like, depiction does not equal glorification. Mm-hmm. Now it might, but simply saying it depicts this, hence it glorifies it, is, oh my gosh, like how do you portray something and bring people to an understanding that it's unhealthy without depicting it? You can't do that. And you can't, And to take a character like Walt, who seems, I do happen to know a couple of teachers in my relational network here. Right? I mean, to take somebody like so seemingly, quote unquote, wholesome, normal, average, like what you might expect as his character at the beginning, and like to show that is a very powerful cautionary tale. And that's why, obviously I thought it was the same deal, buttered and salted. I was very impressed actually by the slow burn. And I got a little bit of that from the book that somebody sent me, Breaking Bad 101, David. But it was pretty interesting that it was Damon Lindelof talked about how it was crazy that to him, he wasn't sure what to think of the show right out of the gate, because it took 3 episodes just to deal with these 2 bodies, or one that isn't a body, right? So Crazy 8 and Emilio. And so just to realize, like, oh, wow, I'm watching a show that is really going to be a slow cooker that takes its time. And I really enjoy those types of stories, at least when they're done well, when they're engaging, when the acting is really good. The acting has to be good when the story actually moves very slowly. Like if you're going to have a ponderous tale, then you really have to be able to see the actors pondering life, and you have to want to ponder the ideas with them. And so I also like the nonlinear nature. I like how a few of the episodes open with, like the episode that opens with him walking out with the bag of money and his head's already shaved, and you're like, wait, what's happening here? And only watching it for the first time, I'm watching that opening thinking, okay, how far ahead is this? Is it going to be resolved at the end of this episode? Is it from next season? Are they just teasing me with something that is far and yet to come? So I thought that was a really nice way of, and they do it a few times, of course, even with the pants flying and the truck crashing and at the opening. And so not knowing kind of where the show is at when it does those moments, and then not knowing where the show's going, even when it's going in linear time, was fun. And as somebody who does like black comedy, the bathtub scene really stands out to me as a hilarious moment. Yeah. It's actually funny. There's a very funny comedic action film called The Big Hit with Mark Wahlberg that probably only my wife and I have seen. But It's a hilarious comedy film, but a lot of black comedy. And in that film, he's a hitman and actually does take care of bodies, but he dissolves them in a bathtub. So now I actually have learned something, that movie is now wholly unrealistic, as Breaking Bad has explained to me. Maybe he used different chemicals. I don't know. But
I was going to say, yeah, maybe.
A lot of fun. Maybe he had a different chemical makeup. Yeah, I'll maybe that. Someone will have to watch it and let me know.
Or a cheap, maybe plasticky bathtub. I don't know. Like that. Yeah. That's definitely where the show starts to earn a little bit more of its TVMA rating, which I meant to have a bit more of content warnings at the beginning of this episode. But I think people know now that TV, this is one of the first shows, at least that I saw, that really pushed the boundaries of what you could show on what would still be considered primetime TV. It was like 8 o'clock Sunday nights. So it's not 11 p.m. It's not, it was cable network. And so that makes a difference. But certain episodes pushed the gore just a bit more. Although it's not, I don't think, tremendously graphic, but that's just me. But yeah, the slow burn, I agree. The pacing is key. It's very common to say, like, oh man, that show was so slow, or that movie is slow, in a bad way, as if it's a bad thing. And it can be if it's not done well. But this show goes from fast to slow depending on the moment. I mean, the closest thing I can think of to compare it to is sort of like we talked a lot about when we did our episode on Scrubs, how Scrubs can take a really heavy dramatic moment and undercut it with comedy before and after, and do it in a way that doesn't feel like stylistic whiplash. And this show does that too, both with comedy and with the pacing, which I think is brilliant. And even one of the things, James, as you mentioned, the whole educator thing, that whenever Walt is, or for that matter, whenever any character in a show gets a chance to monologue, there's probably a good chance that they're talking about something bigger than just the thing they're mentioning. And in Breaking Bad, that's especially the case. If he's teaching his class something, we should be taking notes too, right? We should be sitting there like, okay, so what's the thing he's mentioning? What's that about? He mentions chemical reactions. Sometimes they happen so slowly you don't even notice them, like the rust on the underside of a car. And then sometimes they're rapid. And that was in Crazy Handful of Nothing, or not Crazy Handful, well, Handful of Nothing episode, whatever it's called. Yeah. And that was the one you just mentioned. And so the explosions,
that's right. If I throw this across the room, I'll blow up the podcast right now.
Right. Yeah, exactly. This is not math. And so the fact that he is undergoing those changes so slowly at times, and then so rapidly, and that fits with the rest of the show too. Not to spoil anything, but the pacing is careful throughout. But as far as my distinction of it being buttered and salted, I would say that once you get to a certain point in the show of investment, and this is without spoiling anything, I felt like each episode was like a punch in the gut, not just because it was brutal or intense, but because the story was so compelling. It's like a book that you can't put down. This was how that show was, but you had to put it down because new episode wasn't for a whole week, or until the next season dropped. And so I remember watching this show with my dad, on Sunday nights at 8 o'clock, or 9 o'clock, whatever it was, depending on the time zone. We would text each other, BRBA ? Like, are you watching this? Yeah. So we're both watching it. And then after it ended, created by Vince Gilligan, one of us is calling the other one to talk about it. Or eventually we were watching Talking Bad with Chris Hardwick, where he would sit down with members of the cast and they would kind of go over the themes or
I didn't know that was a thing.
Aspects. Oh man. Yeah. You should look up Talking Bad. Because then they did Talking Dead, right?
Yeah. They did Talking Dead.
Yeah, and probably
I never knew
and stuff. Yeah,
I never knew why Chris. I want to say Hemsworth, but why he was like everyone talked about him like he was back. He was doing. I never knew why, but now I know why. That's cool. I didn't know that was a thing.
Yeah, I don't know if you can. I'm sure you can find it somewhere. AMC is notoriously annoying about their streaming stuff. Fortunately, they've given this to Netflix, thank God. But their other stuff, they have their own streaming package, sort of. It's weird. Yeah. But anyway, the other thing, as James, you mentioned, just showing something in a show doesn't mean it's glorification, right? I've talked to a lot of Christians who were shocked and appalled that I watched this show, because they're like, but doesn't it glorify drug use? And in my head, I'm just like, that really proves to me that you've not seen the show, because it does not. it really doesn't. It shows the ugly and dirty side of it. But additionally, one cool thing about the show, I mean, it's set in a kind of unusual place. You know, it's not set in New York. It's not set in the suburbs. It's set in New Mexico. I guess the suburbs of New Mexico, but then also out in the desert. And that's just a part of the country I am in love with. Beautiful use of that nature, juxtaposed with the just chaos of what they're doing and dealing with. There's so much foreshadowing. It subverts a lot of your expectations. And I don't think this show would have been possible if Bryan Cranston hadn't established himself as such a comedic juggernaut before this, because I never really watched Malcolm in the Middle, but I was aware of the type of character he was. I still think of him as, what's his character? The guy from Seinfeld. He was in a bunch of episodes of Seinfeld. Yeah. He's the dentist. Yep. He's hilarious in that. And so it really subverts your expectations, not only of what type of character he's going to be, but also if you're comparing it to something like Fargo, right? Where it almost has a Fargo feel at the beginning, like, oh, this kind of simple guy, he's in over his head. He's in, you know, he's fallen into the wrong crowd. He doesn't know what all he's getting into. And then hilarity ensues. No, it's not really like that. It's very different from that sort of Fargo formula. But it really focuses on the slowdown, the in-between moments. And that's another wonderful thing about the show, is that it's not just focused on the big stuff. There's almost no major events happening off screen. So they don't cut away from all of the big stuff, but they don't cut away from the little stuff either. That's really where the story takes place. So anyway, we could rant all day long about how much we like the show.
I feel like there was a whole slew of the moral dissent stories that kind of came out in, like, Dexter was 2006.
Oh yeah.
I think so.
Yeah. There were shows like Nip Tuck. I know that I kind of want to go back and research if The Shield was among the first. I feel like there was a couple others in the earlier 2000s, but it may have been one of the forerunners. And then this picked up, and several others since then. And I think, Christians have really misunderstood this style of filmmaking. And I think you can certainly, just as in the same thing with any secular genre, secular music, et cetera, some people can and probably will watch it and take away from it an enjoyment of the illicit for all the wrong reasons. But that's actually, that's in opposition to what the actual narrative is saying. I think if the narrative, we could certainly find some shows. I think more in film, you find elevation. We just did an episode, last episode was on Escape from New York. And we actually talk about how Snake Plissken is sort of a glorified in a way that probably we shouldn't enjoy. And the narrative does nothing to really denounce his attitudes and and his way of life. But so in film, you actually have a lot of those moments pop up where they give you an anti-hero that really shouldn't be lauded. But I certainly don't think so far that's what is happening here. And so I think the ability to distinguish between those two narratives is probably key for a Christian. Otherwise they're going to look like they're not judging with right judgment, as Scripture tells us to. Like, judge with right judgment. If we want to denounce something, we need to make sure that the thrust of what it's actually saying is lauding a character versus showing the tragedy of a character.
This is a conversation that's actually currently going on too. I don't know anything about the show. It's Jack Reacher, is that right? Amazon show, and
I think it's called Reacher, but yeah,
Reacher. Okay.
Yeah.
The actor is a Christian. I don't know anything about the actor, or I don't even know his name, but I just saw a YouTube video. He's got a YouTube channel, and he was talking about how a lot of Christians are essentially writing him letters and telling him, like, how dare you, cannot be, you're obviously not a Christian because you're acting in this television series. Again, I don't know anything about it, but it does seem like it is even currently a conversation that's taking place of Christians thinking we should not engage with certain types of media just because of potential content within the media. It's definitely worth having the conversation, even when we're watching Breaking Bad, for example. Should Christians engage with Breaking Bad?
No, I did see that headline, which makes me think that we may be reviewing Reacher before the year is out.
There it is.
I know. I'm like, it makes me really want to watch it now. No, and maybe there are some Christians, to throw a bone to those people, maybe there are some Christians for whom a show like this would be dangerous, maybe harmful for them in terms of
Yep.
being tempting. Like, just because we have the
I
freedom.
literally know a couple, David. I know of people who have been involved in that scene or addicted to some of those substances who just the simple watching of it starts to would make them salivate. And certainly they shouldn't. Yeah, it's interesting. As a pastor, I now have a couple of literal cases of people who told me, I cannot because X. It's like, awesome.
Yeah.
Do not watch.
Yeah, and they definitely don't. I mean, and that's the thing too. Just like, for a recovering alcoholic, maybe going to a wedding where alcohol is going to be served is a dangerous situation for you, where it's a joyous occasion for everyone else. That's an important thing to have the discretion to avoid if needed. So we can't say that this show is amazing for everyone. Certainly it's not age appropriate for everyone. It's heavy and it's dark.
Hey kids,
watching it with my kid. Yeah.
Watch Breaking Bad.
Yeah. But I will definitely say that there are a lot of themes that the show gets into that, and you're right to say that there are people who miss the point, because all throughout the series, I met people who I think really took the wrong thing away from it in terms of who they were rooting for and what they were hoping would happen and whatnot. You think at times, like, I don't know if you quite understand what the filmmakers are going for in the case of this show. But there's so much that we could get into the depths of. And so as we get into the lab and shift gears on the Winnebago here, we're going to be pouring some unidentified chemicals here and and shifting gears towards the theology discussion. Yeah. And so I'm going to go first, if you don't mind, because I think that a show like this requires a little teeing up, right? We've never tackled an entire show before. I think the closest was you guys did, I guess we did Daredevil in pieces. So that was similar, but after it's been finished, to cover a whole show from start to finish is pretty rare. You guys did something like this with Good Place, though. So I just think it might be worth teeing up the show as a whole. And the first episode really gives us a good clue as to what that is. Vince Gilligan, the creator, pitched this show to networks by saying this is a story about a man who transforms himself from Mr. Chips to Scarface. And I hope that's not too much of a spoiler there, that's the idea here. And that was how he pitched it, and that became known pretty early on in the marketing of the show. And for those like me who have no idea who Mr. Chips is and had to look it up, basically the closest comparison I can make would be Mr. Feeney from Boy Meets World, right? Or someone like Captain Kangaroo or Mr. Rogers. Somebody who is
wait. What about that guy from? What about the guy from Ferris Bueller? Yeah, Bueller.
Yeah. Ben Stein. Yeah.
Yeah.
That would have been hilarious to have just kind of staggering through. This is not math. And so to have him transform into a sort of depraved warlord, drug lord, type character, was the intrigue of this show. And one of the tools that the show uses to highlight it is Walt's classes. I mentioned this a little bit before, that what Walt's doing is, in teaching his students, he's also teaching the audience a little bit more about what's going to happen. And it's so funny, the timing of this, because just today I was teaching my students a little chemistry in the class that I teach. And I have a bit where I talk about Breaking Bad, and I have a little picture of Walt, a little meme of Walt saying this. And it's in this first, in this clip, which I've actually brought a clip here. He tells us a little bit about what chemistry is. He asks them to define it, and they say, oh, it's a study of chemicals. And he says, no, that's not what it is. And so we'll just let Walt tell us here.
Chemistry is the study of matter, but I prefer to see it as the study of change. Electrons, they change their energy levels. Molecules change their bonds. Elements, they combine and change into compounds. Well, that's all of life, right? I mean, it's just growth, then decay, then transformation.
Right. And so these three, he lists three specifics, and it wasn't really until this viewing, which is like my fourth or fifth or something, some embarrassing number of times, that really clued in that he's not just saying, oh, this is a show about me changing. He's saying specific ways. And so he says that there is a change in energy level. And so like an electron changing its energy level, Walt transforms from a passive, kind of defeated doormat of a guy into Heisenberg, a vengeful man who's not going to be pushed around. We see that the cancer diagnosis, the foray into crime, causes Walt to change his bonds too. And so he's, straining and altering his relationships in his family, not just with his wife and son, but also with his brother-in-law. And then as a result, he joins forces with Jesse, combining to change into a compound as they establish their bloody criminal enterprise. And so there's quite a bit there in terms of just the foreshadowing of the types of changes that this character is about to undergo. And honestly, the thing that stands out about this show is not just this is a guy who's been beaten up by life, and this is what life will do to you, which is, I think, maybe how a secular mind would approach a show like this. And another reason why what we do here is so important and so different. These changes mirror the ways that sin affects our lives. Sin affects and corrupts us, but it also expands outwards, not just to us, but to those we love, resulting in strained and broken family bonds. We see this throughout the Bible, and even in narrative form, even if it's hard to point to a single verse that says this, we see this throughout the theme in Scripture, especially throughout Genesis, which covers thousands of years of time from God's curse on Adam and Eve, all of creation from them. We see a pattern of broken relationships with Cain and Abel, with Noah and Ham, with Jacob and Esau, with Joseph, his brothers, so on and so on and so on, all the way throughout the Old Testament. I mean, these changes that we see in energy, right? Kind of like what Walt was saying earlier, or what we were talking about earlier. They can be slow and gradual, or they can be quick and explosive, like fulminated mercury. And so the impact that we see of Walt's decisions really follows that clear pattern of private sin affecting those around us, because really the things that he's choosing to do, we as an audience are led along to sympathize with him. And that makes it, like you said, Jam, really awkward and and difficult at times. Like, oh man, I'm rooting for him. Like, I'm glad that this happened, but really, should I be? And I think those are the questions that they actually want us to ask. I mean, did that jump out to you guys, this whole idea of change within this character? And again, based solely on the first season, we have to kind of keep the discussion there. So thoughts on that theme?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think nowadays the language would be, as having conversations with people and hearing people talk about men and masculinity. I mean, this has been a theme. I mean, you go all the way back to Fight Club in 1999, right? So you have men who aren't sure what to do with their masculinity, and here you have Walt probably being what people in 2024 would call a quote a beta male, right? He starts out kind of as that beta male, and now you've got this shift to the alpha male, and yet we kind of see all we're really seeing is really negative aspects of both in a lot of ways. It's like where are we going to see the net positives in this character as far as the change goes? Like, there's obviously things, like, there's difference. I think they even talked. I was reading something about some people commentating about how even his decision to have the mustache, like his Walt mustache, is just sort of this weaselly, weak-looking, not very strong male mustache, just so that it almost looks like a guy who can't quite grow a full one, And so just to kind of look like he's less than a man, and so he's becoming more of what I think culture throughout history has determined a manly man, but kind of without any of the traits that as a Christian we would say should accompany somebody who is manly or somebody who is masculine, and so. It's kind of fascinating seeing him go from something that we'd say probably. I mean, he's not really doing well. It seems in the beginning, he seems very withdrawn. He seems very disconnected from his family. Even he doesn't seem. He seems unhappy even before the diagnosis. And so you see him go from a person who's not where we would want a Christian man to be in a more passive role to not where we would want to see a Christian man in a more aggressive role. And it's like you say, man, I've just seen change go from one negative to another net negative. I'm not seeing a lot of positives, even though we might see them occasionally. Like sure, we all want to see justice meted out on that jerk with the car at the gas station. Like there's a little part of us, just like we've talked about other revenge stories before, the Punisher and other people, Like there's something where we like seeing the vengeance that God will eventually bring on people, but we don't really think we should be the instruments of it. So like there's aspects that we could enjoy, but they aren't necessarily aspects that we should emulate, because they're hopeful things we look forward to as our God doing, not something that we we necessarily believe should be enacted in the imminent by us. So there is that mixed bag, like Jam, you were saying. Like there's parts of it we're rooting for because it thematically shows some justice on a few people throughout the course of the season, but not necessarily that we should be human instruments of. So I don't know, Jam, what do you think?
Yeah, I think the biggest areas of change that I thought through with Walt is ultimately like his morality. He seems like the kind of guy who would have never smoked pot, but then you have a whole episode where he's at Jesse's house by himself and he's trying to roll a blunt to smoke, and he doesn't know what he's doing. So that's cluing, even things like that. And the way they're filming that is cluing you in on the guy that he is. And you're seeing a lot of the changing of Walt and his morality and how it's shifting. You even see like with for Crazy 8 and the decision of, do I kill him or do I not kill him? And you see him making a pros and cons list. One of the big things that really stuck out to me was it's the right thing to do. But then what's so crazy about the character of Walt and the storytelling is the fact that when he is backed into a corner, he ultimately like something like snaps in him, and it's almost like this is natural for him, and he just goes at it with Crazy 8, right, and kills him. So like, I don't know that I've ever in my 3 times watching this put together what Walt is telling us with what you just pointed out, David, which is beautiful. But it definitely makes sense now thinking through it. Like his character does radically change in many different ways, or at least change from what we perceive him to be in the very beginning of the season.
Yeah. And I think that's really the key, is that it's the change. You know, it's easy to look at the show, especially on the big picture, without focusing too much on the details, as a guy who is making this very gradual shift into a completely different person. I mean, to the point where a number of times people in the show are asking, like, is that even you? I don't even recognize you. I don't even know who you are anymore. Things like that. But in the case of this show, and especially on this viewing, the question I started to ask instead was, when does Walt change? And if so, is he even actually changing in character, or just revealing who he's been this whole time? Or at least who perhaps has been in his heart, right? You know, the notion is that out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks, right? We're told this in, where's my verse? Hold on. Oh, I don't have it in front of me. It's in Luke. Out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks. I mean, and so do actions come as well. Is he just revealing who he's been? I mean, and given the premise that we see in the pilot that's set up, right, it might seem that it's a lighthearted show, kind of like we said, a little Fargo-esque, you know, where, it's dark, bad things happen, but it's just kind of people bumbling their way through the drug trade. Hal from Malcolm in the Middle, but as a, trying to be a drug dealer. But really the following episodes slow down so much more, and they have this much heavier tone or story about a man who's gradually losing his inhibitions. He's saying, well, what do I have to live for anymore? And even before he tells Jesse about the cancer, he asks, why are you doing this? He says, I feel awake.
Yeah. That was a signature moment of the whole first season. That was big to me. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. It's almost the show the movie that this really reminds me of in a lot of ways is a movie called Joe versus the Volcano. Have you guys seen that one?
Oh wow, that's
Tom Hanks movie.
Forever. Yeah, no,
never even heard of it.
Oh my goodness. Yeah, I think it's the first Tom Hanks Meg Ryan movie. They did a bunch together, but that was the first one. And this guy finds out that he has an incurable disease, and basically there's a whole lot to the story, but he starts to behave really differently because he has this incurable disease. And he doesn't break bad in it in any way, really, in the show. It's just that, or in the movie, but he does lose those inhibitions, and it causes him to say, well, what the heck's the point of holding back? Why not live every day like it's your last, or whatever kind of thing? YOLO, if you will. But One thing that we see, and this actually struck me a lot in reading Alan Sepinwall's book, Breaking Bad 101, not a sponsorship or an endorsement, but just, a helpful guide that has an essay written for each episode of the show, and really gets into some of the underlying themes. To see, as far as I know, a non-Christian author, I don't know his faith, but he's not marketing as a Christian author. He notes in the series that even early on, it reveals more of Walt's dark side early on. They start out as kind of socially acceptable outbursts or reactions, like standing up to the bullies at school. Things that might be defensible. And I love that scene when he puts those guys in their place. I'm like, yeah. He really gets the blood pumping. But, the notion of like, oh, he's just making meth to provide for his family, that's kind of sweet. To eventually the point where he's committing vandalism against Ken, right? Ken's car, he's destroying. And, we see those changes. He retaliates against Tuco. Some of those are admittedly more dramatic changes in energy, not to mention being willing to take Crazy Eight's life after a very lengthy moral deliberation. Like, it wasn't the heat of the moment. This was, I couldn't imagine. But he was at least willing to do that. And what seems to be underlying this transformation, I think, in this is pretty clearly revealed to be pride. They even throw the word pride around a lot in this first season in terms of why he won't accept help for his treatment, why he's holding off, keeping to himself. So much of it comes down to a guy who's discontented in every way. James, you pointed out earlier, he seemed like he was pretty unhappy with his life. He never thought that it was going to turn out the way that it did. And, he's too proud to rely on his family. He thinks he's entitled to break the law in order to make things right. He even gets a face-saving way to pay for his treatment, and he rejects it outright. The one moment I think that makes this most clear is when Hank says, "I'll take care of your family." And there's so much about Hank we'll get into in future seasons because Hank's an amazing character. But at this point, they haven't explored him yet. But when Hank says, "I promise I'll take care of your family," not "your family will be taken care of," by the way, that's the way he says it. And Walt's reaction to that is just like that type of face. That's the exact thing that underlies so much. And so he's not just cooking meth for money. He wants that choice. As in that discussion about whether or not to get treatment, I feel like I've never really made any of my own choices, he says. And so he craves that. He wants to be awake and to recognize and be rewarded for his brilliance. And so this is a way for him to do that. And Luke 6:45 is, there we go. There's my note. The verse that we see pride being at the root of it, that the good person from the good treasure of his heart produces good, and the evil person from the evil treasure of his heart produces evil. For out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks. So to me, it seems like just as in real life, Walt's pride is the root of his other sins that we see happening in the show. It prompted Lucifer's fall, Adam and Eve to disobey God. It motivates our sin today. Pride is at the root of all of it. But anyway, I think that there's a lot in this show. We jumped obviously right to the Walt's a sinner, Walt's doing bad things, but it is Breaking Bad. So it even the points where the show causes you to be sympathetic with him, I think that alone is telling us something. What are the conditions that would make me willing to do these things for the sake of providing for my family, or at least to justify things under the guise of providing for my family? There's a lot of angles to this. What do you guys think? Do you think that's off base?
Well, speaking of that, David, actually, I found this mask, and it actually says it's from your school. So are there some missing supplies? Because I was sort of wondering if are you having some financial problems we should know about?
I will say the whole public school teacher who can't afford to get treatment and has to work a second job. That might be the most relatable part of this show. I know some people who work in a public school and just that's not always affordable.
Yeah. I think one thing that comes to mind for me thinking through this, the big question of how would you spend your last days? If you were told you were going to die, right? Walt gets his cancer news, and even in getting his cancer news, he's like, it's you hear the ringing, like it's everything's mumbled, and he's just focused on the mustard stain on the dock. Like, but that's one thing that's coming to mind is like, how would you live out your last days? And I think what we're seeing with Walt is he's living out his last days being true to who he is. And what's interesting about the character is you've got this reawakening, almost like a rebirth happening. And as he's reborn, he's struggling to put to death that old man. But what's interesting is it's a complete and total opposite, right? So Romans chapter 7 comes to mind. Have a desire to do what is right, but not the ability to carry it out. And then Paul goes on to say, thanks be to Christ Jesus, who will deliver me from this body of death. Thanks be to Christ Jesus is what Paul says. But you almost have a reverse of Romans 7 of, I have a desire to do what is wrong, but a morality that doesn't allow it. And then like, who will allow for it? Cancer. Like it's almost a reverse Romans 7 to where now he's like, no, I have an ability to carry out who I've been this entire time. And I don't need to necessarily hide who I've been this whole time. And I think that does root it into pride, right? If pride truly is what causes sin, right? That's the start, the root of sin. This question of how would we live our last days? A lot of times, like if you get asked that question, a lot of times you're thinking of things like, well, I want to do this, I want to spend time here, and I want to do this, right? And that even in itself could be a prideful answer, right? You've only got 24 hours to live, and this is how I'm going to do it. I'm going to be, but I think we're seeing, you're hitting the nail on the head. Like we're seeing who Walt has been this whole time. And this news of, man, you're going to die is just the rebirth he needed to be able to live out who he's been the whole time.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, and even to the point where when he is, when they're talking about treatment and they say, you know, obviously we'll get a second opinion, right? And he's kind of like, wait, after everything he's done at that point, like, what if I'm not dying? You know, he almost has to cling to that. Like, no, I've got to be on my way out to help justify this. Right. He's almost frustrated that that anyone's even mentioned, oh yeah, well, it might not be as bad as they were saying, might be treatable.
I think that's why he pushes back as long as he does. Like that, I honestly think, yes, pride, but pride that has fueled this rebirth, this new man. And I think that's why he keeps it from his family as long as he can, because man, if they never knew he had the cancer treatment and he goes out in a blaze of glory, no big deal. Or then like, that's why he goes as long as he does without getting the treatment, right? And him and Skylar have all the issues they have, because if he doesn't actually seek treatment, then he is justified in what he's doing, right? He's able to be this new man that he wants to be, that he hasn't been his whole life. And I think you even see glimpses of that with the gray matter, right? It's almost as if he's like reliving the glory days, but he's reliving them in the way that he wants to relive them. We get small glimpses of the gray matter within season 1, and you're starting to get filled in on like something happens there and he's not in it and he's definitely not happy about it. Yeah. And then, you know, you watch that and you think like, why would he not take the money? Why, like, they're offering to pay for it. Why would he not take the job? And it's because if he takes the job, he's not going out the way he wants to go out, and he's not getting to be the man he wants to be.
And it's funny because he considers it. I mean, before he sees through what Elliot's doing there, he is considering taking the job. He's like, oh, this would be wonderful. Like, that would be great. And then he says, we have excellent insurance. And he's like, oh, like he can't accept anything that might seem to be charity. He can't rely on the community around him. I mean, and how many, goodness, I mean, and I don't imagine this is exclusive to men, but I know it for sure is maybe a bit more common for men. How often are we unwilling to accept the help that comes with being part of the body of Christ, right? To lean on those around you. I mean, and during that intervention scene, which is a brilliant episode, I mean, it's so uncomfortable and weird and quirky, but also like everything gets on the table. You know, they say it's okay to lean on people, Walt. You know, I know that's difficult for you, but it's important to do. And I'm like, man, yeah, let's preach it, Skylar. Like, for once, me and Skylar really on the same page with a lot of this. for sure.
Oh, wow. Really? I found myself on the same page with her a couple of times, but most of the time, I don't know.
Yeah.
We'll talk about her a little bit later. But the phrase I like to use, you're talking kind of using the biblical reference to the old man, but it's sort of the reverse. And in this case, I like to call it the hidden man. It's the hidden man that is coming out. Because I honestly think from there's season 1 of Breaking Bad, I feel like I'm watching the real life version of the Hulk.
Oh yeah.
I mean, the point of that very popular Marvel character is, or maybe more accurately, is what evolved over time, is that the Hulk is not something new in Bruce Banner, but something that was always inside or growing inside and just waiting for the opportune moment to explode out of him. And the gamma, a cancer-causing agent, is something that actually sort of releases the Hulk, right? And so so it really is, as you were saying, David, absolutely, this is revealing who he was. And actually that Breaking Bad 101 book kind of talks about that. And some of the different writers ask, okay, is it revealing the hidden man, right? I mean, like Scripture says that we look on the outside appearance, but only God sees the heart. And I think this is the darkness in his heart. This was the heart of darkness that he's not going into, like in a Joseph Conrad novel, but it is coming out of. Right, it's not what goes into a man that makes him unclean; it's what comes out of a man that makes him unclean. And this is bringing it out. And what's funny is, again, like there's some change, but it's almost, to me, it's like a sin exchange, because we see he's got. I know people don't like to think of anxiety as sin, but we're told not to have anxiety and to give our sin to God. So missing the mark with anxiety would be sin. So we see him as a man fraught with anxiety and concerns and worries and frustrations with his car, and that the glove box doesn't work. And there's all the little things that just frustrate a lower middle class kind of indebted person that he and his family are. And we see it going from that anxiety, and it's giving way to an arrogant confidence. That's like, but it's just, the changes are almost sin exchange, and something I'll talk about here in a minute. But I think the pride also, the pride for a first time watcher, like I don't know what these relationships entail, but he's denying a wealth of the wisdom that we also see as Christians in the book of Proverbs about taking counsel. And some of Skylar's stuff is ridiculous. Oh, the intervention annoyed the heck out of me. And that group therapy session, that person should be fired. but his inability to accept the charity or to be served. And that's very common among men. Like I want to be a servant, and I want to serve people. Oh, no, I don't want to be served. And not exclusive to men, as you already mentioned too. Like that absolutely manifests in women too. But this prideful DIY thing he's got going that makes him reject his treatments, even if you have frustrations with a friend that are, it seems obvious there's problems there, even though I can't quite see all beneath the layers that I'm sure later seasons will expose. But why the fracture exists doesn't matter. This could have been, even if somebody phrases something wrong and says, "I'll take care of your family," like this could have been an attempt to have relational redemption. Yeah, that he wastes because of his pride. And sometimes relational restoration or redemption doesn't work out, but he could have actually received the charity, seen where that had gone. I don't know. Like right now, it's pretty frustrating to come through season 1 with Walt and say, like, you're choosing an even worse kind of death than cancer over what could have been receiving, sifting the terrible counsel and getting the good help that you could have got out of some of that.
Yeah. And you know, that whole scene, that whole intervention scene, he makes some good points about not wanting to seek treatment. Like, I mean, it's compelling. I get it. I get why some people don't. But one thing that stands out, he says, you know, I'd be miserable. I'd be this unalive man, all this stuff. And that's how you'd remember me. And that's the worst part. That's what he says. That I think that's the worst part. It's not that you'll have no father. My daughter will grow up not knowing that you'll have no husband. It's that I will be remembered as weak. And instead, he's far more willing to be remembered, even to record a video at the beginning of the first episode, kind of trying to justify a bit of what's about to happen, and then going out and being willing to go to town with he thinks the cops are coming, you know, being willing to go down in a blaze of glory with them. So he's willing to go down but he just wants to be strong. He wants to be perceived as strong. and as brilliant. Gray matter, I mean, it's such brilliant naming because it's a combination of their names, but also gray matter is a component of the brain, right? And so it has to do with the fact that he's seeking that intellectual validity that he eventually finds in the drug trade. I mean, there's so many aspects of this that are pitfalls that are certainly far more dramatic in a show like this, but that so many of us face on a regular basis, or in a slightly different format that are at least relatable. So anyway,
well, to his defense, hang on, I do want to mention this, and I didn't plan on it, but I want to take a moment here to just focus on the reality is we live in the 21st century in a very feminized culture, and most forms of therapy and intervention and all those things, men as a stereotype, but I think in a larger fashion, men do not need to babble out all of their feelings and emotions and vomit them out in a way like that. Like, there are different ways that men and women in general, with exceptions, process their emotions. And some of his desires for alone time, even though we know other things going on, that desire to have alone time and silence and not have to share every feeling you're having every second. Like, we're actually just working through the Proverbs as a church, and there's so many verses about when to restrain one's lips. And to be able to respect someone whose process needs that solitude and silence, which oftentimes manifests more in males, perhaps, but women too. To disrespect that, like, I found myself getting very irritated with supporting characters in this show for not. But I think that's where we've gotten. We've got to a place where even men feel as though they're somehow wrong or evil if they don't vent or vomit every little feeling that they're having. That's like that's not necessarily the road to health, even from a biblical perspective. So,
but also to vent them not in a. But not to get carried away, right? I mean, it seems like there's a pressure. No, it needs to be calm. It needs to be therapeutic. I'm feeling very angry, okay, well, if I'm feeling angry, I'm not saying it like that, right? It's going to take a different form. And so it does seem that you're right, that there is this desire to, if only we had, like people say, oh, if only women ran the world, there'd be no wars, or, things like that. Neither here nor there, right? Like, the separate discussion for another day, I suppose. But it does seem in this case that is a big part of what he is responding to and reacting to. And especially we see his relationship with the only other male besides Jesse and I guess Bogdan is that not a very positive one, is him and Hank. And Hank is this major alpha male guy, and he's just trying to kind of hold his own with a little bit. And their dynamic throughout the show is always very interesting. Yes. But we get that introduced here a little bit. And we really aren't going to talk that much about Hank even in this whole season, because there's more that gets brought up later. Ooh. But yeah.
I had just one more thought with the interrogation scene. Going back to our thought process of it revealing who Walt has been the whole time. One thing that I thought was interesting about that scene, watching it through again, and again, like the storytelling is so on point. Marie, we see Marie is living who she is. Was it kleptomaniac? Like, she loves to steal things. And isn't it interesting in that whole like therapy session where they're all together and sharing the talking pillow, she's the one that says, I think you should choose however you want to die. If you want to do the the treatment, you should do it. And if you don't. And she is like, she is the only one of the characters that we've seen so far that, like, when she's approached about stealing, for example, she doesn't deny it outright. And she almost tries to justify herself in points. And so she's the only other character at this point that we've seen that is essentially doing what Walt is doing, living as her truest self. And then she is the voice that breaks that whole interrogation that says, no, I think if Walt wants to die and choose how he's going to die, he should. And he's the only one, she's the only one that does it in that scene. Even Hank, like the alpha male, right? Hank is the one that's like, hey buddy, what's going, like he's uncomfortable. He's, what's going on? Right. But she's the only one. And then that tears a rift between her and Skylar, but Marie is the closest to Walt at this point in the series.
Yeah, in terms of having a big secret, right? That we as the audience know about, at least.
Yes.
At this time, right? Because with Marie, there's certainly something going on that's been revealed, but not really put to rest. Yeah.
Well, and she's the most, but it's interesting because what I really enjoyed about season 1, kind of in the back half. I mean, you guys were ahead of me, kind of even coming up with notes and ideas and talking about pride's obviously a big thing, and some of the stuff we've already talked about. So I was like, okay, what? And I was like, well, what am I going to talk about? But I wasn't through the season yet. And then the back half of the season, this sort of kissing cousin kind of theme emerged that I was watching, kind of to what you're talking about. We have a character who's similar to Walt, but we actually have every character to a degree similar to Walt. On a curve. It's like, he's a teacher, right? So if you're a teacher who grades on a curve, it made me start thinking about the chemistry of sin and how the first season actually deals with the illicit or the illegal or the sinful, because the show, we get a show that's talking about a very addictive, incredibly addictive drug, right? And I think in some ways we see that Walt is becoming addicted to his own pride, to the power, to the money that are starting to flow from his wicked ways. So he's not getting addicted to meth, but he's getting addicted. Yeah. And I love then that the show explored that virtually every character is addicted to some form of sin, not just Walt and Jesse. I think a pivotal moment is when Walt and Skylar get into, how do we say this nicely on the podcast, some illicit behavior under the table at the school meeting. And then they go and they wind up having sex in a public place in the car. And Skylar's like, why was this so good? And Walt says, because it was illegal. Yeah. And then we have everybody. He has those conversations strategically the back half of the season. Skylar and Walt have some conversation about that. His brother-in-law, they have the conversation about getting illegal Cuban cigars. So even the police officer is involved in illegal behavior. You just got to do some of that sometimes. Skylar's sister's doing the shoplifting. And I don't know if the son did a lot of illicit behavior, but he was stealing a camera shot of cleavage. He wasn't really smoking pot. He got accused of it.
I think the one thing I'm thinking of is early next season. So,
okay,
I won't say, but there's more with him.
Right. So I was just thinking about the composition of sin, and I think that there's a way that Christians try to paint sin in churchy terms, as if, oh, sin is gross, it's unappealing, it's disgusting, it tastes bad, and it doesn't satisfy. And on one hand, I don't think any of those things are entirely untrue, but I don't think that they're the full truth, because anyone outside of a legalistic church setting knows the real truth of sin, and that's that sin tastes good.
Yeah.
Right? It's like candy. It's like refined sugar. I suppose it's like meth, right? Or it's like, at least it's like high fructose corn syrup, like all the things that taste wonderful, but rot your teeth and make you obese, right? It absolutely, like Snickers satisfies you, but it doesn't satisfy long term. It doesn't satisfy, certainly doesn't satisfy eternally. It's a fix. And it's one thing that we don't, and that's what we see the characters, like every character is kind of addicted to something. And as I say, like Proverbs 19:7 says, it's the woman, it's folly personified as a woman kind of calling out. And then you have wisdom personified as a woman in the same chapter. But the woman folly is calling out, stolen waters are sweet. Bread eaten in secret is pleasant, right? It's like the stolen waters or pleasures are sweet because they are forbidden. It's like things that are illicit taste good, even to people. I guess that the question for a theologian is kind of, okay, wait a minute. So if we look at Genesis, why do image bearers of God find that sin tastes good? And it's like, yeah, well, because ever since Adam, there's something in our chemical composition, our spiritual chemical makeup, that actually is designed to combine well and give a good chemical reaction in a spiritual sense to combining with sin. It's our sin nature, right? We have something in us that's one part of the compound. And so then if there's enticement externally or action externally, those things combine, and it's like, oh, there's an amazing reaction, and it's explosive or bombastic, right? And that's why you mentioned Walt teaching the students about different ways you can mix them. And then you look at the way Walt is walking out so self-satisfied with that bag of money from Tucos. Like his corrupt internal sin nature has combined with then that opportunity to perform a sin. And it's like the action and the internal and the external combine. And it's like, boom, he's and there's an explosion and he walks out happy, right? It's like James 1 says, each person is tempted when he's lured and enticed by his own desire. Then when desire, when it's conceived, gives birth to sin, and sin then when it's fully grown brings forth death. And so you talk about the transformation. It's like there's Walt is growing, like transformation. It's almost like this sinful nature has been given its birth into this seemingly new person, even though it was already there, right? It's the combining of these things that's now giving birth to this new thing. And then I feel it's not just Walt being corrupted. We see him kind of trying to corrupt Skylar, at least from my perspective so far. Like, let's have sex in the car, honey. Let's do these illicit things. It's like a reverse garden thing. Like Eve saw the fruit. It tasted good. She gives it to Adam. He's tasting the fruit and he's kind of trying to entice his wife. And then they even have that conversation, right? He's like, well, what would you do if I was doing some stuff that was, and season one ends with her cryptic, well, you don't want to find out. So she's maybe not entirely sold on that, at least at the end of season 1 here.
Yeah.
It's interesting. Like, 2 Peter 2 says, for speaking arrogant words of vanity, they entice to sensuality with the passions of the flesh, those barely escaping from those living in error. And at least right now at the end of season 1, it seems like Skylar's a little enticed by a little bit of his new nature, but still not entirely committed to just I don't think if he said, I sell meth, honey, let's do it, she'd be really excited right now. So,
right. Yeah.
But it was interesting to see. It's like almost every character already is compromised. And as a Christian, like all sins get the same wage. I'm sorry. You break like Cuban cigars or selling meth. God's eyes, if it's missing the mark, it's missing the mark, guys. Right?
Yeah.
I mean,
Right. Well, I mean, and I think that's another really excellent note is that in a lot of shows or movies, the characters would be seen as justified, right? There's this big trend now that even villains are sympathetic, right? It's
just misunderstood, David.
Right. Yeah, exactly. If we just change the vantage point, they're really the good guy. Or for that matter, well, I'll come back to that in a second. But basically this idea that they are just misunderstood, right? That they're easily justified and that it's society that is making them this way. I mean, it's a tremendous trend in that way. But what happens if you have what seem to be generally upstanding members of society get along kind of easygoing folks that aren't criminals that are revealed to have these natures underneath? I mean, the show really does seem to be a case study in sin nature without necessarily being able to or being willing to call it that. It is revealing that. I mean, in a pretty remarkable way. So, yeah, it definitely stands out. So
I think that may just leave you, Jam.
I was going to say, so Jamco, what themes stood out to you in this season?
So, I mean, the biggest theme that stood out to me, this was a big point that my wife and I talked about, was just the vanity of life under the sun. And then I parenthesed apart from Christ. And so, reminded me of Ecclesiastes, vanity of vanities, says the preacher, vanity, all is vanity, all is vanity. That's Ecclesiastes 1. Or I thought of Mark 8:36, for what does it profit a man to gain the whole world but forfeit his soul? For what can a man give in return for his soul? And it also made me think of, we're coming out of the Christmas season, it made me think of the hymn, All Glory Be to Christ. And, it says, should nothing of our efforts stand, no legacy survive, unless the Lord does raise the house, in vain its builders strive. To you who boast tomorrow's gain, tell me, what is your life? A mist, it vanishes at dawn, all glory be to Christ. And so, man, I think you could break down every single character, but I just had 3 case studies of these characters. And so the first is with Walt. Walt finds out he has cancer, and in a desperate attempt to, what he says is care for his family and leave behind a legacy for them, he breaks bad. And so, he can't keep a healthy marriage while he's doing it. He can't keep healthy relationships with a relationship with his son while he's doing it. He eventually gets caught up in all of his lies. He's keeping his family in the dark about his cancer. He even starts smoking weed at points. So like his whole moral compass seems to shift, or it's actually reemerged, as we've talked about, or actually emerged rather. And we actually see who he is. But I think a lot of it is because he perceives the meaninglessness of life, right? That question of what would you do if you only had 24 hours to live? We're seeing exactly what Walt will do. He recognizes everything he's done up to this point has been meaningless. I think gray matter is such a big, crucial point for the character of Walt, especially in season 1. We start getting clued in season 1 that he founded it with Elliot. He walked away with it. And I don't know if I read too much into it in season 1, but it seems like him and Gretchen potentially had something together there. And then Elliot kind of gets in the middle of it. And so we already talked about, like, he's constantly anxious and he's constantly overwhelmed. And when he breaks bad, none of that fixes it. And, when you get into Ecclesiastes, the author of Ecclesiastes talks about how we're essentially chasing wind. And so, like, that is the entirety of the character of Walt from the very first episode to the end of the episode, man. His life is meaningless. He wants to do something that matters, but every single thing he's doing seems like it doesn't matter. At the turn of every corner, right, everything's going wrong, and eventually all that money that he's making is going to be completely and totally gone. Or you think of Skylar, and man, this makes me sad thinking about it, but like her character, typically everyone hates her character. And that actress does a really good job of like portraying a character that you just hate, but like, but she, like, her character's holding on to a marriage that Walt is just completely and totally disconnected from. He's disconnected before he breaks bad, and he's completely and totally disconnected after. And then I would argue he's actually using her, which then makes me hate the character of Walt all the more. He uses her. And, she's attempting to help her husband, and every single attempt she has to help her husband, it turns into more conflict with Walt. Now you can get into, you've already brought up, James, like the feministic culture that we live in. And so you could get into like her maybe fulfilling the curse by ruling over her husband. And I think her character does that perfectly. But there are genuine times where you see her character wanting to help Walt, and it just causes more and more conflict. And
let me just jump in there. Let me say, as just a first season viewer, I'm surprisingly unspoiled about this show. I'm very happy.
Oh, nice.
But I did see the Everybody Hates Skylar stuff going on. Yeah. So even for my comments, I'll say, as just a first season Christian viewer, I'm frustrated. I don't hate.
Okay.
It's sort of like I'm assuming that's what I say. I feel spoiled about. I feel a little like maybe I've got spoilers, because hate's a strong word. It's like, oh, where does this go? But like right now, it's like, I like, to your point, it seems like good intentions, but not always the best ideas.
Yes,
that's frustrating.
Yeah,
but I'm scared to see where this goes. To see where if I'm going to go from frustrate to hate. We'll see.
I will say I don't know how much of my previous knowledge is feeding into me just hating her in season 1, but I know, like, my wife and I will watch, like, when my wife was watching season 1 for the first time and I was watching with her, my wife just commented nonstop about how annoying she was and how frustrated she got with her as well.
There you go.
So
annoying's a good word.
Yeah. Yeah. But like, she's holding on to a marriage that, her husband doesn't even actually care about, and she's no longer married to the same man that she thinks she is. And the man that she knew is, for lack of a better term, dead. And so she is, in fact, chasing the wind. Everything she's doing is in vain. And then you have Jesse, who is the low-life druggie on the verge of being caught. Quite literally on that ride that Walt was on with Hank. If he had not been hooking up in the door with the girl next door, he would have been caught. And he begins working with Walt, but is constantly being forced into things he does not want to do deep down. Like, that's one of the reasons I love the character of Jesse, because you see his actual internal struggle. And so, like, from murder to continuing to selling crystal meth to even then using crystal meth, his friends pressure him back into it, even though he's like, no, I think I'm going to stay off of it. Ultimately, all the strides he attempts to make in season 1 to better himself, because he does, in fact, try to make strides to better himself. Even selling the house, I think, is an attempt to better himself. Every single stride is just pointless, meaningless. It's chasing after the wind. And so, man, you can watch season 1 and you can walk away, and if that was all Breaking Bad was, I think you would walk away with, man, this was meaningless. Not just because it finished with just one season, but because they literally got nowhere. There's no legacy that Walt leaves. The marriage is no better, and Jesse is not improving himself. He's actually going downhill. So then, just a thought. Ultimately, the reason I put in parentheses, apart from Christ, ultimately what each and every one of these characters needs is Jesus. Walt doesn't need to break bad. He needs to be born again. And Skylar doesn't need the perfect marriage with Walt. She actually needs the perfect bridegroom in Christ. And Jesus will, regardless of every single thing that he is trying to do to better himself, Jesse will ultimately not better himself apart from the grace of God and the mercy of God and the power of the Holy Spirit to change his heart and cause him to walk in the rules and statutes of the Lord, as Ezekiel 36 states. And so, man, they need Jesus. And of course, that's not the showrunner's intention, but that's the very clear need of all of these characters. Vanity is the big idea, though. Did you guys happen to pick up on that theme of vanity as you're watching season 1?
I know I did. I mean, I get to preach a little bit on this on Sunday, and anytime I hit Ecclesiastes and chasing after the wind, my favorite visual is Wile E. Coyote, who's just a perfect visual for chasing after something that never can be caught, will not satisfy, and all of his desires and designs and exploits and machinations all blow up in his face. And I kind of feel like that the camper trailer that they have and all the equipment that they've stolen, I feel like it's in Breaking Bad here. It's all a metaphor for Acme products, and if I had to wager where this show is going to go, it's like this. Whether and again, and they're out there in the desert cooking meth too. It's very Wile E. Coyote-esque. I mean, they're out there trying to. They're chasing after these things in the middle of the desert, and I do feel like either they're gonna find themselves flattened somehow, or things are going to continue to blow up in their faces, and things are not going to end well. And so, like that, I feel like Breaking Bad could be the very, very serious version of Roadrunner Coyote episodes. So that's I mean, like that.
It's an allegory.
Yes.
Even if I remember right, Roadrunner's a little bit blue. So there's a little to that as well.
Oh,
wow.
It's blue, but it's still just as tight.
Tight, yeah. No, I mean, and to your earlier point, Jam, about, this idea of vanity. I mean, gosh, it's so hard not to talk about future stuff that involves Jesse, but like, it's so hard to just limit it to this season. But you can tell with him that like nothing seems to go well for him, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, and that is really.
Oh yeah, we didn't even talk about how he actually protected his brother.
Well, I was going to say that episode. What was that? Episode 2, I think, of the whole show. No.
Three, four, yeah, it was in the middle.
3 or 4. This is, I believe, after they dispose of the bodies, and he's reacting to that. His little paranoia about the 2 Mormons coming up to the door, and that's the bikers with the hand grenades and all that craziness.
That's because he's on meth,
right? Yeah, he's paranoid and freaking out, and he goes home. We have like almost it's almost a prodigal son type situation. He goes home. He's lost everything. He has nothing left, and he goes back to his parents' house. And he's trying to mend fences there, and they aren't having it because they've been burned so many times. I mean, it really makes you sympathetic. I at least felt pretty sympathetic for his parents, because even though we're supposed to be, and maybe this is just because I'm watching it later on, a little older now than when I was first watching it. They've been burned so many times by their druggy son. And like,
Yeah.
even while he's staying in the house with them, he's going out and dealing drugs and coming back. Like, yeah, I get it. I mean, but then he sticks up for his brother. And despite his efforts to make right by his family, the thing he gets kicked out for, he kind of sacrifices that relationship with them in order to protect his brother. I mean, there's some nobility there with Jesse that has not really been explored at this point in the show, that you don't really see. This guy's just a deadbeat. He's just a druggie. You know, he's worthless or whatever, in terms of, especially even in the way that Walt talks to him. Goodness gracious. Jesse cannot catch a break in this season of the show.
Flip that around, flipping around what happens there. He covers for him, but like flipping around that narrative is what could have been an opportunity for repentance and restoration is actually ruined by the other sibling's sin.
Yes.
And so that's extra sad. And that's where sometimes we don't even notice our little sins, how they ripple, right? That's like that the younger brother having a blunt ruined what might have been restoration and reconciliation of family relationship there.
Yeah.
And because of all the, because that's a tragedy, right? That's his whole narrative turning on what seems like a small sin of a kid having an illegal substance and his parents finding it. And then that's covered for. Think about the whole trajectory from a what if perspective, right? On that show, if that hadn't happened, maybe there could have been restoration with the parents. Mm-hmm. Maybe he wouldn't have. Maybe where he goes now with Walt in seasons to come might not have happened. And so again, it's one of those things where like we can focus on Walt's sin is so horrible, and yet a young, ignorant, young kid's sin may have contributes to a ruination path for Jesse's life. Or wherever it goes in seasons.
Jesse's our true Rowan 7 guy.
Yeah. I guess that's like every sin matters. It's easy to look at Walt's and not see everyone else's sin contributing to the courses and pathways. Yeah.
And like one thing that we see in this season, if we look at the overall arc of the story, right? They get into business together, they cook meth, and then everything goes wrong with Emilio and Crazy 8. And then they deal with that situation. And then we get a glimpse into both of them reacting to that. Then we get Gray Matter. We get a bit of a peek into his past. We see how Jesse's reacting to things in the present. And then they come back together, right? So at that point, I mean, really, they're trying to go their own way, right? And this is where we meet Badger, right? At an early point, you know, Badger's spinning a sign, you know, to make money. And Jesse tries, he's altered by his experience with Walt. He's not content with making terrible meth anymore, or not pretty good, not great meth anymore. We can do better. He's applying himself. He's walking away from Walt, affected by him, but not in a good way, only towards greater obsession. And then they come back together. You know, he goes to Walt and says, I was just wondering if you want to cook again. And he pushes him away. And then Walt comes back. Hey, it's really, I mean, I keep thinking of the whole prodigal son thing, but it's like a twisted, dark turn on the prodigal son. But additionally, it does seem to fit that theme of what Jam was saying, which is vanity, right? They just keep circling back around. The sun goes up, the sun goes down. To the place where it started, there it goes again. A man is born, a man dies, and then generation after generation are described. Ecclesiastes just describes these patterns and these cycles. And we see that again and again. It's alluded to in Jesse's past, and then it's pointed to in Jesse's present with his relationship with Walt. They just keep coming back to each other. Those bonds that they form, once those chemical bonds are formed, you can pull them apart, but they're going to be attracted back together, even though the tension between them is so palpable at times. It's really remarkable. It's almost like he's replacing Skylar with Jesse, like in terms of the most important in his life, most important person in his life, and that relationship that is formed there. Despite the fact that, I mean, and again, at this stage, I'm a little more tempted to be forgiving of Skylar, because she's grieving so much and she's trying to hold on to what she can, and she's pregnant. But like at the same time, she's, the relationship that they have is fraught, to say the least, at this stage in the show. So, man, there's so much more we could discuss on any of these points, and and we will in future seasons. Some of these points are going to come back around, but for now, it's time for us to go ahead and hop into the lightning round. before we wrap the episode, let's see what other things we can briefly sift out in a little bit of a round of receive, reject, and redeem. There it is. I saw the lightning like 4 seconds ago, so I guess that storm's pretty far away. So what are some things in this show, again, season 1, that we can reject, pretty categorically or thoughtfully reject, that are either glorified or illustrated in this show? Jam?
Well, the obvious ones should be selling drugs and participating in drug use.
Wait, what?
Those should be
what?
the obvious ones from the show.
I learned it from watching you.
Just say no.
Yeah. First
to
Peter
say no.
5:8-9 comes to mind, right? Be sober-minded, be watchful. Your adversary, the devil, prowls around like a roaring lion, seeking to devour. And then we're told, resist him, firm in your faith, knowing the same kinds of suffering are being experienced by your brotherhood throughout the world. Yeah, we should reject selling drugs. We should reject participating in drug use. The other thought I had was, it seems as if, especially with Walt, this idea of legacy and my life only matters if I leave behind a legacy. And while I would agree that your life matters based on how you live, I would say it matters based on how you live for Christ. The show promotes like a hedonistic worldview. Live to whatever gives you most pleasure and most joy and most desire. And ultimately, from a biblical worldview, we know that we are not reaching our fullest potential. We are not reaching our fullest joy apart from Christ. And so, yes, the way we live our lives matters. The legacy we leave behind matters, but it matters as far as we do it for Christ.
Yeah. I'd piggyback on that. And just, you alluded to this earlier, Jam, in that like we have to reject every place this show is telling us to put our hopes, because it absolutely doesn't in any way point to the hope that we would have. So it's like, whether it's like, even the one point she's like, well, what about Eastern medicine? What about this? Well, even hope in a medical cure, that's only a temporary solution for life's ultimate problems. So obviously not meth, obviously not even seeking out, my old partner will pay for all, like none of those are going to really satisfy the real problems of the heart. And so all the places, like the show does nothing to show us where our hope should be. Yes. And all those should be rejected. So even the places where he should go this way instead of that way, it's still not reaching upward. So
yeah, absolutely. Another thing that I think we can reject is the isolation that is really exhibited in this show, because Walt is pushing everyone in his life away, and even Jesse. Like, he won't talk to Jesse about what's going on. It's not like, while he is replacing his wife with Jesse in certain ways, it's not really emotionally, right? And so he's unwilling to be vulnerable to anyone. He is seeking out fulfillment and gratification. And I mean, the biggest things in the show, for whatever reason, at least on this viewing, are these moments. And this is the brilliance of how Bryan Cranston played this character, is that we get these little moments where you're not even necessarily needing to use words. The exasperation on his face when Hank offers to pay for his treatment, the way he reacts to Elliot's offer, and then also the way that he reacts after he gets the money from Tuco. He sits in his car and he has that growl. And to borrow a phrase from another Walt Whitman, that would be his barbaric yawp, right? Just this like, he's roaring, right? There's this wild man that he's allowing to kind of come out for that moment, just like this scream from the depths of his being that it's hard to understand what that even is. I mean, it's weird to watch. Like, what is that? Like, he got the money. Yes. You feel alive, I guess. Is that the thing? You feel awake? I mean, that barbaric yawp, I mean, I think is exemplified in that, or is symptomatic of that isolation. He doesn't have a community to be a part of. It is not good that man should be alone, Genesis 2 tells us. And so I think that this is kind of an extension of that, in terms of things that we can reject, for sure. Any other reject points?
No, but I think that kind of leads us right into something I'd say we should redeem, is the show gives us all these glimpses of things that don't satisfy to the extreme, but it feels like pieces of them should be satisfied by something, right? He does need to not be bullied into sharing everything, which in the ways that he gets badgered. Yeah. But yet that person yeah. But yet that counselor does provide a couple pieces where it's like, okay, well, you do need it should be a safe place to share some things. There should be safe places to do that, and so like, he shouldn't have the absolute alone state that he's in. Yeah. But he shouldn't. But all the places that they're pointing him, they're like fragments of what the church should provide. And so I was like, okay, like those things do have a place and a time and a space created by God for people who first put their trust in him, who then say, okay, now we can show you how to be a biblical man and to be vulnerable in the right places, but also not just be weak. Like there's a place where you can be strengthened and have a place like that right temperature and tone and timbre where you have that space to be vulnerable and yet still have strength because of Christ and have then the ability to fight. Like there's both solitude in Christ and then community in his church. And it's like you get both of those things that right now it feels like both of those are sort of just burning in, like the chemicals aren't right. It's that one speech that he gave the kids, whereas like if the one chemical was just off a little bit, it causes all these horrible defects.
Thalidomide, yeah.
Thalidomide, right? Mm-hmm. And it's like what the world is offering in this show is the equivalent of thalidomide, and that the church is that place where Christ has created the community in the right place, where we have him and we have his people, and that's where we need to be. That'd be the redeem. Is like, okay, it's begging for something that's almost there, but the chemical composition that the show gives us isn't quite right.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. It's just the left-handed, right-handed version of it. It's another great moment of him, in class teaching. And at that point, he's considering, if I remember right, whether or not to kill Crazy Eight. On the other hand, anyway, so that's excellent. Other things that we can either receive outright or redeem for godly consideration.
I think it's receive and redeem. It's a both and. Walt seems to have a strong desire, at least that is what his actions or his initial actions communicate, a strong desire to provide for his family. And we've already talked about the state of our culture, and then James, you're hitting on being a biblical man. And so we receive Walt's good desire. You could get into the nitty gritty of it, but outright what he says is the reason he starts the meth business is to provide for his family. And so we should receive that not as far as like, hey, let's go do a meth business to provide for our family, but as in we as men should provide for our family. I think it's in Titus, a man who does not provide for his family is worse than a non-believer. And so, man, those are harsh words, but they're words from God himself. Yeah. And so Amen. God has made us as men in a particular way, and has made women in a particular way. And so for men, one way in which the reason I say it's a redeem is, if we are Christian men, we ought to live in the way that God has made us. And God has made us to be protectors and providers. And so, man, we should be doing everything we can to protect our families, to provide for our families, to care for our families. And so that's one big area I think we should live in accordance with God's good design for manhood and womanhood.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, and that's fascinating. This doesn't exactly fit with the receive, reject, redeem element, but this is something that occurred to me earlier. How many stories are there that would take the idea of, well, crime is acceptable if it's staving off something else? The idea of, oh, would you steal a loaf of bread to feed your starving family? This is kind of that story amplified, that is really. Yeah. I mean, because would you sell drugs? Yeah. Would you end a life? Would you start a criminal enterprise in order to provide for your family? There's a point at which you can't justify these actions. I mean, and the show hasn't quite gotten us there yet, because he's still kind of cleaning up his own messes and bumbling through things and sticking up for Jesse at times, right? I mean, and so there are elements that are admirable. I mean, and I don't want to simply paint Walt as this completely irredeemable character, because he does have moments that are virtuous. And like you said, that is something that we can either receive or we can, like you said, redeem. So one thing that it does, that this season especially does very well, is that we get that moment where he has to wrestle with whether or not to take out Crazy Eight, right? So he's killed Emilio in self-defense. That's completely justifiable in virtually any, understanding of that situation. But then they've incapacitated Crazy Eight, and he's making this list, this pros and cons list. And you'll notice Judeo-Christian values is written on the list. It's the right thing to do. All of that stuff. You won't be able to live with yourself. And then on the other side, there's one thing listed: he will murder you and your family. And then he's trying to talk himself out of it. Yeah.
David, is it weird that reminded me of Friends, the sitcom?
With the whole Rachel list.
Yes. Because he's got all the cons, and then the one con is not Rachel.
She's not Rachel. Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry. I never thought Breaking Bad and Friends would come together in my head, but that did it. So
fantastic. Sorry, go on. Right. I mean, yeah. So, but what we see with that list, I mean, he's considering and he's weighing this life. And for people, especially for a show that so many say, oh, it glorifies drug use and violence and all these evil things, I'm like, I don't think it does. I don't think that this, I mean, if you watch old Westerns, right, about as clean as you can get, people get shot and they go, Wilhelm scream, and then they fall over. And it's just the taking of a life, whether any action movie, a Marvel movie, anything, it is of very little weight. It's of very little value, that particular life. They weren't named, they weren't important, but this one, you get a whole episode, a whole backstory. They've crossed paths before. He learns his real name. I mean, he gets emotionally attached to this guy, and then he has to take him out because he knows that guy's been playing him this whole time. I mean, it's definitely admirable that the show is willing to value human life to that degree. And that's something that really stands out, and especially juxtaposed with the fact that they're disposing of Emilio's body. And that's how the episode opens. But there's also this larger scene with him and Gretchen, where they're tallying up what's everything that a person's made up of. What are all the elements? And we're missing something. There's a hole, right? There's a God-shaped hole. And she says, what about the soul? And his response is, there's nothing but chemistry here. And then he kisses her, and it's sweet, but sort of sweet. But it's juxtaposed with him realizing that's not the case. I mean, and I think that while this show states that, I think that the narrative undermines that, which I appreciate, because that's something that we can receive, that we're not just chemistry, and that human life is of tremendous value, even if in this case, it's a life that, did Walt do the right thing? Probably. I mean, it's awful as it is. It's certainly not the best thing to do, but if he had let them go, how much more harm would have come to him and his family? I mean, oh goodness, the whole thing is such a mess. But I love that the show wasn't willing to just have it neatly clean up, or have him be willing to, pull a Dexter on him or something like, well, now you get to see who I really am. That he's saying, I'm sorry, as he's killing him. Yeah. Heavy stuff. So anyway, any other points on that note that we can receive or redeem?
No, I'm excited to, I'm glad that not only do I get to finally watch it this year, as I've turned 50 and been struggling with some emotional stuff. No, I've
got some good ideas.
Wondering how I'm going to make money. No, no, I'm excited to go on this journey this year with you, David. And it's more exciting than just watching the show, and Kat and I are watching it together, but it's exciting that we'll be able to stop at each juncture and talk through it on the podcast throughout the year. So that's cool.
Yeah, I'm excited too. To be honest, I was very intrigued when you said you hadn't seen it yet, because I was like, what I wouldn't give to go back and watch this show for the first time. And so I really wanted to have you on, partly because of your insight in general, but especially because you hadn't already seen it, and it wasn't sitting in your, sitting in the back of your brain for all of these years, like it has been with mine, collecting dust. And so that fresh take I was really excited about. So, and Jam, I'm so thrilled that you were able to join us as well. I mean, really, this
Yeah,
is
me too.
a dream team, and I'm not exactly sure it'll be the same lineup for each episode, but I really hope it is. Logistically, we'll try and make that work as best we can. So fantastic. Well, I think that we should probably pack up the lab and get the RV pulled out of the ditch and get to wrapping things up here. So
yeah, I think the wife expected me home a while ago. So
right, yeah, I was going to say. So yeah, as far as next week's episode, I don't think we have that tacked down just yet. But keep an eye out on social media channels for what we're going to be doing for the next few weeks. And in the meantime, keep engaging media from a godly worldview. And remember, you are not a mindless consumer.